They now had to put their differences aside in the interests of the country.
We and the DA were like water and oil. We had to sit down, think about South Africa, interest of our people first, in real terms. We've got a country here that can just be reduced to ashes.
In fact, there was, I would say, a fairly poisonous atmosphere between the DA and the ANC. You know, Sir Ramaphosa accused the DA of treason for that so-called flag-burning advertisement.
It is despicable that a political party can, as it seeks to express itself, go and burn the symbol of our unity, the symbol of our existence as a nation. And I think it is treasonous.
Because if there's one person in this country who is guilty of treason against the people of South Africa, then that person is Cyril Ramaphosa.
Now, 30 years later, we had an extremely divisive election campaign. We talked past each other as political parties.
For 29 days in June, the country is gripped by a political drama, and South Africans hold their breath as the country enters into uncharted waters to a new political landscape. The ANC has taken a huge battering at the hands of Jacob Zuma's new political party. And for the first time since 1994, it doesn't have an outright majority at national level.
In many ways, we have entered uncharted territory. We've never been here before. We've suffered a strategic setback.
We'll drop maybe from 57% to 52%, not below. That was a big, I don't want even to say a wake-up call. That was a big shock.
You don't go into an election campaign to lose. There was generalized shock and disbelief.
I think the ANC were living in la-la land. I genuinely do not think that they imagined the result would be as bad for them as it turned out to be.
There were a number of things that we felt violated the letter and the spirit of the agreement. And then the big question is, that you have to ask yourself is this big enough for us to break this? Is this big enough for us to walk away?
It's YM News, accurate and unbiased.
Stories making headlines. Political parties have 2 weeks to form the 7th administration. Yesterday, the IEC declared the final 2024 results in South Africa's watershed elections. For the first time since the dawn of democracy, the country will see a national coalition government after the ANC lost its outright majority, sitting at 40%.
Here we are confronted with an outcome that is not favorable for the democratic forces led by the ANC. What do you do?
Parties were very aware that our country is it's like a tinderbox. A small spark can get things out of control. So I think that we were very aware that we need to move fast, we need to move forward in a responsible way so that you don't allow any possibility for things to get out of hand.
The first strategic question you ask yourself is, how do we safeguard power? At that time, people expect leadership, not slogans, rhetoric, talking things that are unreal. You are dealing with a real situation now.
Jacob Zuma's new MK party expressed deep dissatisfaction with the election results. They leveled accusations against the IEC and issued threats of violence. In the wake of the July 2022 unrest, threats from Zuma's camp were not to be taken lightly.
Don't start trouble when there is no trouble.
Why do you think they asked you?
Because I didn't have any personal ambition to sit in the government, so I was an inside-outsider or an outside-insider. I think I was the only person from the DA side who'd actually been very integrally involved in the multi-party negotiation process, CODESA at Kempton Park. So I'd been in a few of these rodeos before.
CODESA, held from 1991 to 1992, brought together stakeholders from across the political spectrum to negotiate the end of apartheid. These talks paved the way for the 1994 elections and the formation of a government of national unity. The then DP party, under the leadership of Tony Leon, decided to stay out of the GNU in 1994 to become the official opposition.
When you did the negotiations previously, was there any difference in atmosphere?
You know, I think the biggest difference is the advent of social media. Because if you go back to the days of Kempton Park CODESA, there was no social media, there was no 24/7 news cycle, and your comments were not weaponized and instantly distorted very often on Twitter or X. In this case, it was extraordinary. I mean, the amount of background noise or the volume that was cranked up, usually with the destructive intention. I'm thinking of the Iqbal survey newspapers, if that can be called that, which were shocking in terms of the fake news that they were peddling, trying to use race as a weaponization against the DA and indeed against the ANC negotiators.
We're seeing conversations on the ground that are happening. African National Congress currently engaging now.
One of the big talking points has been this potential ANC-DA coalition.
I then started to say to them, let's put feelers. Can you talk to Helen? Because me and Ned were talking to the DA in the last election. So we were familiar with each other, with Helen and Helen in particular.
Fikile Mbalula is my counterpart in the ANC. I often introduce myself as the Fikile Mbalula of the DA. And so we do message each other now and again. And in the results centre, everyone's at close proximity. We're the Democratic Alliance, so we're at D. And ANC is not far in front of us. And there they were, not too far away. You walk past each other, you chat to each other, you talk to each other. And at some point, someone must have said to another person, we need to start talking, or we need to look at this, or something like that.
You and some of the other negotiators, you knew each other quite well. Helen Zille apparently greets you as Fix.
I met Helen a long time ago, but one of the things that I did with Helen Zille, myself, was to negotiate for Floyd and Julius. They had gone out publicly, and in the normal way of doing things, Julius, they insulted Helen, and Helen took them for defamation. So Julius approached me and said, please go and talk to Helen. We are prepared to apologize. We don't have this money that she's looking for. Helen was the premier. And then I organized to see her, and then we met. And then he says, do you want soup? You know? So we had a nice discussion. Well, Helen is very tough. She's firm on what she believes in, and she's not a pushover. Trust me. And she loves to doing and leading things herself. But it does not mean like she's an unthinking lump, kind of a human being who doesn't think and not open to engagement. She engages, sometimes to a point of irritation, you know. But she's tough like that. And we are also made of the same fabric.
How did you establish good faith?
Well, you know, the useful thing is that although the ANC has fought with me for years and years and years, as long as I can remember, and called me all sorts of names, they know it's nonsense. They know that I come from a history being very aligned to the mass democratic movement, as it was called in the 80s, and that I've always been absolutely committed to democracy. They know what my history is. They know who I am. So I do think the ANC doesn't think I am what they say I am. In fact, I know they don't. It's just politics.
What do they say you are?
Oh, they always call me racist and this and that. I mean, you know, they know it's a whole lot of nonsense. I mean, they know it better than anybody because, you know, I mean, they know that I hid Mkhonto Wesizwe in my house when I was in the, you know, when they were on the run and all of that. They know it all, you know.
Here we're representing political parties. DA has got a constituency that doesn't want to see the ANC. The ANC has got a constituency and policies that nobody even think you can sit around the table with the DA.
The very first meeting was held between Siviwe Gwagube and myself with the full ANC negotiating team. And they asked that that meeting should be at no other place than the eNCA Club, so I had to smile at that. There was no sense of one-upmanship there. They were basically saying, can we do business?
DA constituted a team with some of the smartest people around. They are not walkovers, but these are smartest South Africans also who can think for their own party. And we did the same on our part.
I came to the conclusion very early on. We dealt with a core group from the ANC. Fikile and Balula sometimes, but not often. David Makura, who really was the anchor of their negotiating team with us. Phoebe Potgieter, Parks Tau, Enoch Godongwana, and Andries Nel. I have to say, those were people of reasonableness, rationality, emotional intelligence. They were very competent and constructive. But they were the tip. There was a big iceberg we never saw, and that was the ANC NEC. And that, in many ways, just reading just the reports coming out of it, the leaks and the we didn't need Roto-Rooter plumbers to see where the leaks were coming from, but they were coming from factions in the ANC. And it was like a snarling majority there, or a snarling minority who were, you know, pretty vicious about the DA, pretty vicious even about Ramaphosa.
The DA had a real fear that the ANC would make a deal with the EFF and the MK party in what they called the doomsday scenario.
If we didn't go into the government, the only way the ANC would obtain a majority would have been to either put together, 12 small parties, which would have been hugely unstable, or to go, which a lot of people in the ANC were pushing for, into a coalition with the EFF and the MK. And if that had happened, I would have said, sell your house and get out of here, but you probably wouldn't have been able to sell your house because the financial markets, the world, would have turned their back on South Africa. It was made quite clear to me. I had streams of calls, visits, agitated people who had a lot of skin in this game from here and overseas, said to me, if you don't form a government with the ANC, you being the DA, it is going to be catastrophic for South Africa.
Our position has always been that we prefer an inclusive government of national unity. So there was never a possibility that we would be in a coalition only with one of the parties, only with the DA, or a coalition only with the EFF.
And the reddest of red lines for the DA was we will not enter into any governing arrangements with the EFF and the MK. If they're in, we're out.
I think we knew that the EFF was in trouble. We knew what they want. They wanted to be in government, either for Julius to become deputy president and Floyd minister of finance. They even called for us to be surgically removed as a ruling party. We are not going to negotiate with them, begging them for anything. It's either take it or leave it. And then they came with that arrogance, which is water under the bridge now. First, they said to us, you are a dying party. You are better off if you die in our hands rather than with others. Now, you don't talk to people like that. First, respect was out of the window. We're not going to allow that. Because once you are totally weak and out, you will feel the wrath of the EFF. So we had made it very clear politically that we are not going to go down that route.
This is the big talking point today. So political parties all racing, and it's against time as well. They don't have much time to get this 7th administration formed.
Could the government of national unity be teetering on the brink of collapse?
I think they're also trying to test who might be willing to work with them, and whether those people would be willing to work on terms which can be agreed with.
We said we won't go into any deal with the EFF and MK, but we have to be the last man standing once they have excluded themselves. And we bet on the EFF and MK excluding themselves, which they did. MK went in there with a very belligerent attitude. So our last man standing strategy worked. We were the last party in the ring that could give the ANC a majority.
I was the first one, by the way, who said we need to join the GNU and even declared that in public. The only difference I had with them was that I will not join the GNU that has got a DA and Freedom Front Plus.
Did you believe, or were you led to believe, that the ANC was in serious talks with the EFF during that negotiation process in the statement of intent?
What we saw was a strong media pushback against the negotiations the ANC was having with the DA. There was a strong media pushback from all the independent newspapers. There was strong media pushback from the Sunday World. There was a strong media pushback from various quarters, including the Tripartite Alliance of the ANC. And at that stage, the EFF was starting to moderate their demands quite significantly. And then we also heard that Paul Mashatile had jetted off to KwaZulu-Natal to meet with Jacob Zuma. Whether that was true or not, I don't know, but we were told that that had happened. And so we realized that the alternative to our deal might well be the RET faction, the Radical Economic Transformation faction of the ANC, getting the upper hand and sidelining Cyril Ramaphosa and doing a deal with the EFF-MK. So that was always hovering on the edge of the discussions.
Do you think that the ANC exploited your fear of a possible doomsday scenario?
Well, I think we exploited their fear and they exploited our fear. I mean, for most of the people in the negotiating team, the doomsday scenario was just as bad as it was for us.
The DA and ANC meetings take place away from the media glare at the house of a private businessman and philanthropist, A.D. Enthoven, in Johannesburg.
The first meeting I attended was on Wednesday, the 5th of June. They called it a whispering session because at that stage, as Mbalula said to us, well, we can't formally engage because we haven't got a mandate from the NWC and the NEC, and all these processes had to be gone through. I don't know how much of it was procedural and how much of it was tactical, but the initial discussion was fairly open-ended, fairly relaxed, and very inconclusive, except for us putting our bottom lines on the table.
The DA gave away their bottom line. They suggested they would be happy with 6 cabinet positions, but they came to regret this later on, regarding it as a strategic mistake.
At that point, the number that we hit upon was 6, because we had 6 apex priorities in our manifesto, and we wanted to see how far we could drive those priorities in government. So that was the initial thinking.
The DA wanted to have as exclusive as possible government and coalition that basically include the ANC, the DA and the IFB. And we said that that's not going to help us move forward. So it reached a point where there was nearly a breakdown about that issue.
Oh my word. So you all sat here?
Yeah. I was seated here, Helen Zille that side.
How did you guys choose where to sit?
We didn't just choose. DA was sitting this side, we were sitting this side. Yeah.
And Minister Mantashe, did he ever attend talks?
Yes, he was here next to me.
Oh, really?
Yes, he was seated here. Yeah, I think Nomvula and others there. It was Helen, myself, and Tony. And then who's the other guy, DA strategist?
Kutsia?
Kutsia was seated there, doing a lot of talking.
He always talks a lot.
And then Gwarube, and then the Premier of the Western Cape.
Oh, Alan Winde.
Alan Winde, yes.
Gosh, and did you sit down here and have talks around the fire too?
Yes.
I was very impressed with the ANC. The big bilateral we had on Saturday at the Eindhovens, and they all 11 of them were very finely turned out and designer jackets and puffers. And we were, we were meant to be the representatives, the DA of the sort of, the capitalist rich classes. We were all dressed in Cape Union, Martin, Uniqlo. We were much more down market. Helen has a view that we must project humility. Well, anyway, I don't believe in that, but we did anyway by comparison. So I often felt we were like the poor relations, the sort of beggars at the feast. Then we were meant to meet on the Friday, and then they called that meeting off. And there was just a pattern of this, of meetings abandoned, meetings not happening. And they were still in talks with others because Gwedi Mantashe said at the meeting, we're off to see the Red Berets now. So they were still engaging at that stage. This is now just 5 days before the election of the president. They were still engaging with the EFF and the MK. So it wasn't clear at all to us whether we'd be taking this further.
The first meeting we had with the EFF was surprisingly cordial. The second meeting was exactly the opposite. And then a third meeting did take place. But the second meeting was a complete disaster.
We were finally set to meet the ANC back in Johannesburg. We all stayed on in Johannesburg on the Wednesday to have a serious discussion. And they never arrived. They never pitched.
Okay, I'm on video now, so please.
They never arrived. Apart from being extremely rude, I thought, well, this is calamitous because we're meant to be in Parliament in 2 days' time. We don't have the bare bones agreement as to how we're going to vote. Are we going to be entering a government? Is there going to be a government? No idea.
The day before or 2 days before we had a meeting where we discussed certain principles about what should go into a joint document. The DA was then given the responsibility to draft the document. We got the document and it was shocking. I mean, we were very upset about it and angry. So I think that there was some misunderstanding about whether we will still participate in the meeting or not, but it was really about that document that was just outrageous.
So we caught the last plane out of Joburg.
At the beginning, for example, the DA came with this position about sealed ministries. And basically, they wanted a power-sharing agreement where you have sealed ministries, so you have full control over your ministry. Now, that's unconstitutional.
Enoch Godongwana was there quite a lot. And Enoch was pretty desperate for this to work because he looks at the markets and the economy and the value of the rand. And every time anything went wrong and the rand slipped, we realized that the ANC realized what leverage we actually had. Because on the one day when we were going to meet here and the ANC did not arrive, and I told a journalist that the ANC had not arrived and it went into the newspaper, the rand immediately slipped. Just from that one no-show. And they realized what the consequences would be if this failed.
So we caught the last plane out of Joburg on the
12th. What
on the 12th, it would be the 12th. We went back home and I thought, well, this was a complete waste. And we then got various newspapers said, I believe the ANC has stood you up. So I said, I've taken the code of Omerta. I'm not saying a word. But everyone now knew, and then the market started tanking and all the things because it looked like nothing was going to happen. The next morning, we did meet, and this time, amazing enough, they were only 20 minutes late, which was of itself quite extraordinary, in a Cape Town hotel in the basement.
Why in the basement?
I don't know. Every time we seem to meet in a hotel, the conference, we met there in the basement, the next another hotel. Basement meetings, anyway. It was a very nondescript land hotel in gardens, but the conference room was in the basement, so that's where we met. And they were very apologetic for not being there the day before. They said they had meetings with the ANC, NEC, COSATU, the communists, who knows. And there were a lot of, obviously, pushback against doing business with us, I suspect, was the subtext of that. And we then said, okay, we're only prepared to vote for Ramaphosa tomorrow as president if we have an agreement where there's an understanding on what kind of government this is going to be and how decisions are going to be made.
We are now chasing time because we are supposed to go to Parliament and elect the president. We had agreed that the party with a bigger number of votes will be allowed to lead.
And up until then, despite a lot of attempts by me, not me, but by him, by third parties and others, Cyril Ramaphosa has not met with John Steenhuisen. There's been no meeting at all.
Post-Mandela, under Mbeki's leadership, the ANC and DA's relations soured.
Cyril Ramaphosa, you know, the man who sometimes masquerades as the President of the Republic of South Africa. Yeah, Mr. Palapala, that's right. Whoever said that, get him a bells.
And recently, communication breakdown reached a point where Steenhuisen had no direct contact with Cyril Ramaphosa, necessitating Premier Alan Windey's intervention.
Finally, after we finished a 3.5-hour meeting with the ANC on the Thursday, which ends about 3:34, John Steenhuisen gets a meeting with Ramaphosa, only that afternoon before.
Where did that take place?
That took place in Cape Town at the President's residence. John then came back and briefed us, and he said, well, Ramaphosa is going to make me an offer to go into the cabinet, and it'll be a serious offer, and he's indicated to me who the other parties coming in are, and it's not going to be the EFF, it's not going to be the MK.
What were the personality types in the room, and what was the interplay between them like?
Yeah, look, Helen's got this portrayal in the media, and perhaps in other circles being the sort of white witch who's defending the barricades of racial privilege or whatever, and very caricatured, but she seems to have a very warm relationship. She calls Kekani and Kenks and Fikile Fix. I mean, I prefer a slightly more formal approach, but she seems to have a degree of intimacy. But I mean, look, on other times, when things start to go off the rails, all that counted for very little. There were some very, very blunt exchanges, either telephonically, WhatsApp, letter. So it only takes you so far, personal chemistry. It's helpful, but it doesn't close the deal. When things get a bit rough, well, that doesn't necessarily help at all.
Just in those hours between, on the 14th, it was on a lot of this was on your shoulders.
I was convinced and determined that we would not go into this government of national unity as a crutch for the ANC. We were not going to be hijacked, we were not going to be held hostage, and therefore those clauses were the critical levers we needed. It'll give us grounds to fight, to draw the line, and if necessary, to walk away. And the public will realize, hopefully by then, that we're not there by grace and favor of the ANC. The voters gave us 22%, the voters gave the ANC 40%. The ANC cannot, on its own, dictate the terms, nor can we.
The current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, what is he like as a negotiator? Do you think he's underestimated?
I suspect he is. I think what Cyril's approach is, and I've demonstrated even here, he's a bit like Franklin Roosevelt. He doesn't attack things head on. He goes in a crab-like way. So he moves from the side and then gets, what he wants at the end of the process.
On the night of the 13th of June, it's the night before a president is going to be elected, and there is still no final.
The ANC sent through version 7 of the document, as I recall. Now, we'd only seen version 1 on the 9th of June. This was the 13th of June, and we were now on version 7, which meant that in between, the versions had been whizzing between different members of the ANC to get it to version 7. And there was a lot in it that we couldn't go with and we couldn't agree with. And we decided to focus on three main things. It was proportionality, it was sufficient consensus, and it was the inclusion of other parties and the way that that would be done and various other things. So we sat late into the night. And as often happens in these things, everyone disperses and then there are a few bitter einders. And I always tend to be amongst the bitter einders. And so in the end, it was Phoebe on the one end, me on this end. And eventually Phoebe said from our side, we're calling it a night, we're escalating it to the president. It's 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning. And they said that the next document is going to come from the president. And that's where it'll be finalized between the two party leaders.
Arriving late at home every day, you just think of when will this end? But you realize, hey, the people put us in this position. We just have got to soldier on.
The next morning early, John was in contact with the president's office, as I understand it. When I woke up to get ready to go to the convention centre, where the first session of Parliament was going to be held, I waited and waited and waited for the final version to come through. And eventually, I think it was 6:10 in the morning, it came through. And I opened it with a beating heart to see whether those clauses were okay, and they were fine. Phew, and I said, okay, fantastic, and now I'm going to get up and get dressed and do a couple of things and finalize things. And then my phone pinged again at about 7:50. And I looked and I opened it, and it's a fundamentally different document. There were key changes to the core clauses of especially sufficient consensus and proportionality and others that I knew we couldn't live with. I had to grab all my stuff. There was no time to do anything. I thought I must get to the convention centre. You get there and the cameras scrum. And I just said, look, we haven't got an agreement. And then the market started to wobble and everybody came to me and said, what? I said, we do not have an agreement as we go into this parliamentary session.
It was very stressful because you realize at that moment that everything here can collapse. When we have worked so much to get to where we are.
So I said, if that is not fixed, we are walking away, even here on Parliament's floor. We are walking away if this is not fixed.
And these clauses were flying then, by that stage, back into cyberspace.
So by that stage, it had been delegated to Andri Snell in the presidency. And I just had my cell phone with a cracked screen to negotiate the last leg on. And it was backwards and forwards with my thumbs and saying, no, this isn't acceptable, this has to be the wording. And in the end, I decided to let go a bit on the proportional representation clause to settle the sufficient consensus clause.
Clock's now ticking. 10 o'clock, the Parliament's meeting, and this is about 8 o'clock in the morning. And it's now after 10. We still don't have an agreement. We don't know what we're going to vote. The MPs are being sworn in. We were saved by two things. The first is they have this bizarre situation in Parliament where every MP has got to put his hand up and be sworn in. So this takes forever. To show you just how utterly incompetent tactically they are, the EFF, in the form of Mr. Floyd Shivambu, stands up and said, we'd like a half-hour caucus break. What they were going to break for, I don't know.
There will now be an opportunity for nominations for Speaker of the National Assembly.
Chief Justice.
I will attend to you just now.
But we have asked for a break.
Fortunately, Shivambu doesn't let up because the EFF doesn't let up. And it was the one time I was very grateful that they didn't let up, because they pushed and pushed and pushed till they got their caucus break. And it was in that caucus break that we finalised it and got the signed agreement.
There was a compromise which says that proportionality will not be included in the statement of intent, And we will agree, as the ANC, that the 60% sufficient consensus definition will remain in.
It was back and forth between us and the Democratic Alliance. And then I think in the late afternoon, I don't remember even, that we then agreed to sign. And we moved ahead with the election of the president.
Tony and I had a bit of an argument about whether we needed a signed statement of intent. Tony said, oh, you don't need to sign. An agreement is an agreement even without a signature. Thank goodness I insisted that it was signed, because in the end we had to know which of the final versions was the final one.
Honorable MC Ramaphosa, 283 votes.
So, despite all the odds, the parties got over the first hurdle, electing the president. Now came stage 2 of the negotiations, forming a cabinet.
We got to a point where the ANC said via Cyril to John, well, we can only give you 6 seats in the cabinet, but here are the 6. And it was a low ball number, but it was very enticing because one of the seats was most important at the heart of the economy. That's the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition.
That's where we had issues with this proportional thing, which we had a difficulty with the DA around, and we really kicked it out of the window to say that is not really our understanding, and that is it.
19 June, Cyril Ramaphosa is inaugurated at the Union Buildings. Still, no final deal. A letter dated 23 June and signed by Helen Zille is leaked to the press and nearly derails negotiations. The DA is accused of demanding way too much.
In the letter, we also listed 11 portfolios that we would be interested in. That wasn't what portfolios we were demanding or even requesting. We were saying, just to get things going, these are the portfolios in which we have an interest.
You've got very powerful people in these processes. So when you think that you've got the deal, it's a deal, it's done, and then something like that comes up. So we employed a whole lot of different tactics to get to an agreement.
The president responds. Again, the letter is leaked. Ramaphosa berates the DA for ventilating negotiating talks through letters, moving goalposts and wanting to set up a parallel government.
When he blasted the DA in that letter, that was leaked by who?
The ANC leaked all of those letters. They leaked all of those letters because they knew that the environment was conducive for them to say, look at this cheeky DA. Who do they think they are? Here we are, the generous ANC, offering them so much, and look how cheeky they are, demanding what the statement of intent actually says they can get.
I have no idea who leaked them. It was very irritating because, in a sense, there's a certain level of confidentiality within the process. Unless you agree that you're going to make a document public, why leak a document? It just seems, as if it's a very underhand way of forcing hands in the negotiation.
Helen Zille's leaked letter results in a pushback from certain factions of the ANC who now want to review the offer to the DA. It results in an NEC meeting and an insistence by the ANC to keep trade and industry.
Whatever events Ramaphosa and the ANC constructed afterwards, we know as a fact that what happened was he went back and that was pulled down by Paul Mashatile and Gwedi Mantashe. They would not wear the fact that there'd be a DA minister at the heart of black economic empowerment and industrial policy in this country.
The critical question we have to ask ourselves is, at what point do we push a bridge too far when an organisation is that divided? And at what point can Cyril take enough of his organisation with him in trying to meet our demands?
Congratulations, Mr.
So help me God.
The DA gets 6 ministries. This was not strictly proportional. Considering the share of the vote it brought to the GNU, it should have got more, and the ANC less.
Why did the DA accept 6 cabinet positions instead of the 10 you would have been entitled to, according to your interpretation of Clause 16?
People aren't interested in details. They just say the DA's fighting about the number of seats they're getting. And people see that as petty. There is another big issue, and that is that no one in the country really had internalized what it means when the ANC loses an election. So they felt the ANC was kind of doing us a favor. The ANC was the big daddy there and offering us something that we'd never had before, that we were now being ungrateful for. So they were saying, here the ANC is making this generous offer. Why are they now being petty about numbers? We don't want squabbling. We don't want argumentation. Shut up and take it.
I mean, if you consider that the DA represents 30% of the GNU and only got 6 cabinet seats instead of 10, which they feel that they were entitled to, and the ANC gained 2 more, and the DA effectively gave away 2 to the smaller parties, they felt very aggrieved about that.
We gave up on the question about our objection to the definition of sufficient consensus, and they gave up on the definition of proportionality. So I think that it was a give and take.
It was a process which was characterized by compromises from both sides, and which is what is important, that South Africans need to know and understand, that you don't get into negotiations with the mentality that is a winner takes all when you have not won.
Was there at any stage truly that you thought the deal was going to be off?
There were 2 occasions that I thought the deal was off. One is when we couldn't get agreement on the statement of intent on the morning of the 14th. Then I realized that the deal could be off. And then the second time I thought it was off was when they offered us tourism and took away trade, industry and competition. That's when I thought it was going to end. We nearly walked away.
Within 14 days, we established government. Parliament was on track. The world responded well. And South Africa continues to be a winning example when it comes to democracy. And everybody clapped.
Yeah, it is remarkable. 5 minutes to midnight and all the other cliches about South Africa, we literally were at 5 minutes to midnight. And I've thought about it since, now that the dust has settled on this government formation, why it happened. I think there were negative and positive impulses that caused it to happen in the way it did happen.
The Government of National Unity is a very unique form of government. I suppose the hope for it is that it will allow us to find real solutions to the problems, very deep-seated problems that South Africa face. How do you sort out local government? How do you sort out the problem of unemployment? We need to get the economy growing.
This GNU that we've helped to construct is a fragile plant. It's not an oak tree, it's probably at this stage, a sapling. And it might not last. And if it doesn't last, the other option comes, roaring through the door.
This is a grand coalition between the ANC and the white monopoly capital. History will judge you and judge you harshly. Thank you.
Our people, our country is stable. As much as there are ideological fanatics who define the outcome on the part of the ANC as a sellout, of course you must understand their limitations of understanding the politics of time. that they don't understand what is a sellout position, where a party with 40% is still able to work with others. You will never get it anywhere else except here in this country.
The ANC need to ensure that it have a stable government. We cannot let the divisions within the organisation impact on the country to the extent that it has, because it's not good for democracy, it's not good for the country.
It stands to be seen what the tactic of the GNU is going to be in the next 10 years. It could as well disappear with time, or it can become a permanent feature of our politics.